Let me read to you a passage from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 8, verse 23 to 27. It's the Gospel for Tuesday of the 13th week of Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, "Then Jesus got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, 'Lord, save us, we're going to drown.' He replied, 'You men of little faith, why are you afraid?' Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, 'What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him.'" That's from Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 to 27. It suggests thoughts about Christ, our support and our stay. Father Mitch Pacwa, born in 1949, is an American Jesuit. He earned his PhD in Old Testament studies from Vanderbilt University, as well as a PhD in philosophy. He also holds other degrees and is an accomplished linguist. At this point, he is a prominent host on EWTN, the Catholic satellite network, constantly displaying a remarkable general knowledge. Well, in one interview on the Vocations Boom series on EWTN, he explained why he became a Jesuit. One reason was that when he was young, he had a flair for stock market speculation, and he reasoned that if he were to be a priest, which he intended to be, he would have to embrace a priestly vocation which put him out of that temptation. So he became a Jesuit, with the vow of poverty, of course. Christ, and not stocks and money, became his stay. I mention him only to introduce another well-known character of his time, Robert Holmes à Court, who lived from 1937 to 1990. Holmes à Court was born in Johannesburg, but spent much of his early life in southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. He was educated in South Africa, and there he earned money selling his schoolmates photographs he had taken of them, and by driving them home in exchange for their travel allowances. He was obviously entrepreneurial. He began his tertiary studies in 1957 at Massey College in New Zealand, graduating with a degree in agricultural science, forestry. He then moved to Perth in Australia in 1961 and took up the study of law at the University of Western Australia. He married on the 18th of May 1966 and was admitted to a law practice on the 17th of April 1968 in Perth. Holmes à Court entered the corporate stage in 1970 when he acquired the company W.A. Wool, which he built up quickly and well. He showed great business acumen, and from there he began to gain control of a string of small businesses. He also enjoyed great success with horse racing thoroughbreds. He went on to acquire Bell Resources, which amid ups and downs finally surfaced as Heytesbury Holdings. All up, he became one of Australia's most feared corporate raiders, and the country's first businessman to be worth over $1 billion. But what happened then? He suddenly died of a heart attack in bed on the morning of the 2nd of September 1990, at the relatively young age of 52, and was cremated, going to his maker with everything left behind to his wife and children. One thing we are reminded of by his story is that everything in this world is very, very vulnerable. The gospel that I read earlier from Matthew chapter 8 verse 23 to 27 reminds us of the vulnerability and ultimate uncertainty of all created things. We cannot make the things of this world our stay. If we do, ultimately, for all our possible acumen and ability, we are being foolish. We read that Jesus got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. The detail which we may notice here is that this sudden danger occurred without warning. That it was immensely serious is indicated by the words of our Lord's disciples, men who were very experienced fishermen and familiar with the Sea of Galilee. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, Lord, save us, we're going to drown." They could have suddenly lost their lives, and doubtless the history of the Sea of Galilee included many lost lives. Who would have predicted in the 19th century, the century that began with the terrible French Revolution turbulence, followed by the Continental War, spearheaded by Bonaparte, followed by other wars such as the revolutions of 1848, the Crimean War, the French and Prussian conflicts, and ending with the Boer War, that the following century would be so much the worse. The 20th century saw 2 world wars, other major wars such as the Korean, Vietnam and Gulf Wars, and conflicts innumerable in other parts of the world stage, to say nothing of the terrible persecutions perpetrated by the communist regimes of Russia, China and other similar regimes. It was all so unpredictable, sudden, protracted and appalling in its sufferings. The sudden storm on the Sea of Galilee may be seen as a symbol of the profound vulnerability of the created order, subject as it is to the effects of the original fall of man. Who would have predicted the major threat now of extreme Islamic terrorism? Who would have predicted the tremendous cultural threat of Western moral and religious relativism? The dictatorship of relativism manifested in the passing of legislation mandating the acceptance of such disorders as same-sex marriage, abortion rights, and doubtless worse deformations to come. The point I am making here, though, is that all should be on guard against making the things of this world their stay and support. This world is in no sense our true home. Our lasting peace and delight cannot be sought for here. We must, as creatures who possess the gift of life, constantly look to the source of life, the source of true flourishing. That source is the incarnate Son of God, Jesus Christ, our brother and our God. This brings us to the other great lesson of our gospel that I read earlier. Christ was asleep in the boat, which was buffeted so seriously as to be on the verge of going down, but he was present. And the disciples should have had faith. This is what our Lord told them when he calmly rose to his feet to quell with a simple word the power and the havoc of the sudden storm. It may seem that Jesus Christ is absent from our difficulties and sufferings, be they of the individual alone, or be they of the masses and the multitudes. Jesus Christ, by whom all things have their being and their life, is ever near, even if he cannot be heard by us. We must place our faith in him and ever follow his word. If we do this, ultimately all will be well. This is the true answer to the vulnerability of all created things.